This video is best enjoyed during lunch, dinner, before bed, or when you need something in the background while studying or working. Now let's get started. The sun was beginning to set over the Arizona mountains, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple. Jack Reynolds, a 37-year-old veteran, walked slowly toward the town's animal shelter. His worn boots hit the pavement, a reminder of the weight of each step he had taken in his life. Since leaving the Army 2 years ago, he had been trying to find something to fill the emptiness, but there was a void that no job or therapy seemed to heal. Rex, his loyal German shepherd, the war dog who had been by his side on dangerous missions and after an injury had been forced into retirement. He paused before the shelter entrance, his hand hovering over the door handle. The memories flooded back, Rex alerting him to hidden explosives in Kandahar, the dog's warm body against his during freezing desert nights, the way Rex would nudge his hand when Jack's nightmares jolted him awake. Jack's fingers trembled slightly. After being separated during his medical evacuation, he'd spent countless hours trying to locate Rex, only to be told the dog had been reassigned. When the trail went cold, Jack had nearly given up hope. The shelter was small and simple, with rusty fences and makeshift dog houses. The smell of disinfectant hung in the air, mixed with the sound of scattered barking. Jack was there at the request of his older sister, Emily, who believed a dog could help him cope with the traumas of post-war life. He had hesitated, but deep down something inside him urged him to take that step. "You need something to care about again." Emily had insisted over the phone 3 days earlier, her voice carrying the same commanding tone she'd used when they were children. "Something that needs you back. I'm not sure I can be responsible for another living thing right now," Jack had replied, staring at the half-empty whiskey bottle on his kitchen counter. He hadn't told her about the nightmares that left him soaked in sweat, or how sometimes the sound of a car backfiring would send him diving for cover. "Just go and look," she'd pleaded. "For me, for yourself." As he walked through the narrow aisles, he observed each cage with a critical eye. Some dogs barked enthusiastically, wagging their tails in an attempt to grab attention. Others simply watched him silently, their eyes filled with melancholy. None of them, however, seemed to have that special spark he associated with Rex. A Labrador with soulful eyes leaned against the bars, tail wagging hopefully. Jack stopped and reached out a tentative hand, allowing the dog to sniff his fingers. The lab licked his hand, and Jack felt a small smile form. His first of the day. But it wasn't the same. It wasn't Rex. Just as he was about to give up, a shelter worker caught his attention. "Mr. Reynolds, we have a German shepherd in the back that might interest you. He came in a few weeks ago, but he's a bit special." Jack looked up, surprised. A German shepherd? Without saying a word, he followed the young woman to a more secluded area. In one of the cages, lying in the farthest corner, was a large dog with black and tan fur. His posture was stiff, but his eyes showed evident weariness. Even so, Jack felt his heart race. He would recognize that dog anywhere. "Rex," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The German shepherd slowly raised his head and looked at Jack, but there was no emotion in his gaze, no wagging tail, no attempt to approach, just an empty look, as if Jack were just another stranger. He doesn't recognize me," Jack murmured, taking a step back. His chest tightened as if something inside had broken. But then, staring at Rex for a few more seconds, one thing became clear. He couldn't give up on this reunion. The shelter worker, A young woman named Sarah with compassionate eyes and a name tag covered in paw prints tilted her head. "You know this dog?" Jack couldn't look away from Rex's vacant stare. "We served together. Afghanistan. 2 tours." The words came out fragmented, as if speaking full sentences would break the tenuous connection he was trying to establish. Jack and Rex have an emotional story that is just beginning, but what will happen next? Want to find out? Then go ahead and leave a like to support this journey and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the continuation of the story of overcoming and friendship. Jack stood still in front of the cage, unable to look away. Rex, the German Shepherd who once exuded energy and determination, now seemed like a shadow of the dog he had known. His eyes, once full of life, were now dark and distant. The scars on his back leg and one of his ears were visible marks from the battlefield. But there was something more, an invisible wound, something Jack knew well as he carried the same kind of pain. "He's been through a lot," the staff member explained in a low voice. "He was found at a smaller shelter in another state. It looks like he was given up by someone who couldn't handle him. He suffers from anxiety and doesn't trust humans easily." She paused, looking at Jack hesitantly. "Do you know him?" Jack nodded slowly, his voice coming out in a barely audible whisper. "He was my partner, my best friend." For a moment, he got lost in a wave of memories. The grueling training where they both learned to trust each other, the risky missions where Rex had saved his life more than once, and the nights when the dog was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. And now there he was, in front of Rex, and the dog had no idea who he was. The images flashed through his mind. Their first meeting at the training facility in Texas, Rex just 2 years old, high-spirited and reluctant to follow commands. Their initial clash of wills had evolved into mutual respect, then a bond so strong that their commanding officer had remarked they seemed to read each other's thoughts. Jack remembered the night a squad of insurgents had ambushed their patrol. Rex had detected them seconds before the attack, giving the unit just enough time to take cover. 3 men had survived because of that dog's instincts. And then there was the IED that had ended Jack's military career and separated them. The explosion had thrown Jack 20 feet, leaving him with a traumatic brain injury and shrapnel in his right leg. His last memory before losing consciousness was Rex barking frantically, trying to drag him to safety. The staff member carefully opened the cage. Rex watched but made no move. Jack slowly knelt down, extending his hand. "Hey buddy, it's me, Jack." His voice trembled, but he kept it soft. Rex tilted his head slightly as if trying to understand, but remained still, muscles tense. Jack felt a lump in his throat. He knew this wouldn't be an easy process. "Would you like to spend some time with him? We can take him to the play yard," the staff member suggested, trying to ease the tension in the air. Jack nodded without hesitation. In the yard, the scene wasn't much different. Rex kept his distance, sniffing the air, but avoiding any direct interaction. Jack watched every movement, trying to understand what the dog was feeling. "What happened to him after—" Jack began, unable to finish the sentence. Sarah consulted a clipboard. According to his paperwork, he was reassigned to another handler but became aggressive. They tried rehabilitation, but eventually he was discharged from service and adopted by a civilian. 3 months later, he was surrendered to a shelter in New Mexico. She hesitated. The notes mentioned behavioral issues, extreme vigilance, Aggression towards some men? Fear responses to loud noises? Jack recognized the symptoms. PTSD. Dogs get it too. Yes, Sarah agreed. Not everyone understands how to help a dog like this heal. They expected him to be a normal pet. Jack rubbed his own scarred leg. Nothing normal about coming back from war. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Jack made a decision. He looked at the staff member and said firmly, "I'm taking him home. No matter how long it takes, I'll bring him back." There was determination in his voice, an echo of the loyalty they had shared in the past. He knew that just like Rex, he too needed rescuing, and maybe this was the beginning for both of them. Sarah smiled, but there was concern in her eyes. "There's paperwork, and we usually do a home check." "Please," Jack interrupted. His voice was quiet but held an intensity that made Sarah pause. "I know him. I know what he needs." Sarah looked between Jack and Rex, noting the similar weariness in both pairs of eyes. "I'll talk to my supervisor. Wait here." While she was gone, Jack sat on a bench in the play yard. He didn't try to approach Rex again, just spoke softly. "Remember that night outside Kabul? The thunderstorm? You crawled into my sleeping bag, even though you weren't supposed to. 90 pounds of dog, shaking like a puppy." He chuckled at the memory. "The sergeant never found out." Rex's ears twitched at the sound of Jack's voice, but he remained at the far end of the yard. 20 minutes later, Sarah returned with a stack of forms. "My supervisor agreed to an expedited adoption since you have history with him. But you'll need to bring him in for weekly check-ins, and we'd like to provide some support for his rehabilitation." Jack signed every form without reading them. "Whatever it takes." The drive to Jack's house was marked by an unsettling silence. Rex lay in the back of the truck, resting on a blanket Jack had laid out for him. The German Shepherd kept his eyes fixed on the window, avoiding any eye contact. Jack glanced at the rearview mirror from time to time, trying to decipher what was going on in the dog's mind. It was hard not to feel rejected, but he also knew that as veterans, they both carried burdens that made them difficult to reach. "Almost home, buddy," Jack said, more to fill the silence than anything else. The words felt strange in his mouth. Home. When had he last truly felt at home anywhere? The apartment he'd rented after discharge had never felt like more than temporary quarters. 6 months ago, he'd used his savings to buy the small ranch house outside town, a place to be alone with his demons. Now he hoped it might become something more. When they arrived home, Jack parked at the entrance of his small property on the outskirts of town. The house was simple, surrounded by a large yard with a few trees gently swaying in the wind. He opened the truck door and called to Rex, but the dog hesitated. After a few seconds, he stepped down slowly, taking cautious steps. Every movement was meticulous, as if constantly assessing the surroundings. Jack led Rex to the front door, opening it carefully. "Welcome to your new home, boy," he said, trying to sound cheerful, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty. Rex entered but stood still in the entryway, sniffing the air cautiously. He seemed suspicious, as if expecting something unexpected to happen at any moment. Determined to create a comfortable space, Jack had set up an area in the corner of the living room with a new dog bed, food and water bowls, and a few toys he'd bought on the way home. "This is your spot, Rex," he said, pointing to the corner. But the German Shepherd stayed where he was, ignoring the invitation. Jack sighed, feeling the frustration begin to weigh on him. As Jack was preparing something to eat, he couldn't help but remember the days when Rex would run to him, full of energy and loyalty. That dog was different now, wounded in a way Jack understood all too well. The kitchen was barely functional. He rarely cooked anything more complicated than a sandwich. Tonight, though, he pulled out a package of ground beef he'd been saving and started browning it in a pan. The familiar smell filled the small space. "You always could smell food from a mile away," Jack said, glancing over his shoulder. Rex had moved from the entryway, but remained vigilant, sitting in the door frame between the kitchen and living room. Jack took a small piece of the cooked meat, let it cool, and placed it on the floor halfway between them. "Remember this? Your favorite treat after a long patrol." Rex's nostrils flared, but he made no move toward the offering. He looked at Rex, who was still standing in the same spot, staring off into the distance. "I know how you feel, buddy. I feel the same way." "Lost," he murmured, more to himself than to the dog. That night, Jack left the bedroom door open, hoping Rex would feel safe enough to come closer. But when he turned off the lights, he heard the soft sound of paws on the floor. Rex didn't come to him, but lay down near the bedroom door, keeping a safe distance. Jack smiled to himself in the dark. It was a small step, but to him, it was the beginning of something bigger. Sleep came fitfully for Jack, as it always did. Around 2 in the morning, he jerked awake, heart pounding, sweat soaking through his shirt. The dream had been vivid. Explosions, screams, the weight of a comrade's body as he dragged him to cover. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. His hand reached reflexively for the weapon he no longer kept beside his bed. A low whine from the doorway brought him back to reality. Rex was standing there, ears perked forward, watching him intently. For a brief moment, Jack thought he saw recognition in those eyes. Not of him, perhaps, but of the shared nightmare they were both living. "It's okay," Jack said hoarsely. "Just a dream. We're home. We're safe." Rex held his gaze for a long moment, then returned to his spot by the door. But Jack noticed the dog had moved closer, just a few inches, but closer nonetheless. The next morning, Jack woke up to the soft sound of footsteps coming from the hallway. Rex was sitting near the door, ears perked, silently watching him. For a moment, Jack felt a spark of hope. Maybe something familiar was coming back to the dog's mind. "Good morning, Rex," Jack said, stretching and forcing a smile. But the German shepherd only looked away and slowly walked back to the corner of the room. Jack ran a hand through his hair, trying not to feel disappointed. One day at a time, he reminded himself. It had been his mantra during physical therapy, when every step on his damaged leg had been agony. He could apply the same patience here. His morning routine was simple: coffee, a quick breakfast, and a call to his sister. Emily had been his lifeline after the injury, the one who'd fought with administrators to get him proper care, who'd found him an apartment when he was released, who'd pushed him to keep going when all he wanted was to disappear. "How's it going with the shelter search?" she asked now, her voice tinny through the speaker. Jack hesitated, watching Rex through the window as the dog cautiously explored the backyard. "I found one. Actually, I found Rex." The silence on the other end was profound. "Jack, are you sure it's him?" "It's him. He doesn't remember me, but it's him." "Oh, Jack, that's ... She seemed lost for words. "Do you think it's healthy?" Taking in a dog with his own trauma when you're still working through yours? Jack hadn't considered this perspective. Maybe we can help each other, he said finally. We've done it before. I'm just worried about you getting your hopes up. What if he never remembers? The question hit Jack like a physical blow. Then I'll make new memories with him. Determined to rebuild their connection, Jack spent much of the day trying to interact with Rex. He grabbed a tennis ball and threw it to him, but the dog didn't react. He placed a bowl of fresh food beside him, but Rex only approached it after Jack left the room. Each attempt at closeness was met with cold silence. Jack felt the weight of rejection, but he also understood it was more than that. It was fear, distrust, maybe even pain. After lunch, Jack took out his laptop and began researching. Canine PTSD, military dog rehabilitation, helping traumatized dogs. The searches yielded dozens of articles, some scientific, others from people who had worked with rescued animals. One consistent piece of advice stood out. Routine and predictability were crucial. War dogs, like soldiers, functioned best when they knew what to expect. Jack immediately began drafting a schedule on a piece of paper. Feeding times, walks, quiet periods, playtime if Rex became receptive. Structure had been the backbone of their military life. Perhaps it could become the foundation of their civilian one as well. That afternoon, Jack decided to try something different. He grabbed a worn military vest he had kept in an old box in the closet. It was the same vest he wore during missions with Rex. As he put it on, the familiar smell of sand, sweat, and the battlefield hit him. The vest had been stored along with other reminders of his service, medals he'd never displayed, letters from his unit when he was in the hospital, a photograph of his squad with Rex sitting proudly in front. He'd avoided these mementos for 2 years, but now he retrieved them carefully, allowing the memories to surface without trying to push them away. "Let's see if you remember this, boy," he said, taking the vest to the backyard where Rex was. Rex looked at the vest with curiosity, tilting his head slightly. For a moment, Jack thought he had managed to stir some memory. He threw the vest on the ground and stepped back, giving Rex space to approach. The German shepherd sniffed the fabric, his nostrils flaring as he analyzed the scent. For a brief moment, his eyes seemed to lose their emptiness, but then he pulled back, retreating with his tail low. Jack sighed, feeling the hope fade away once again. Sitting on the porch that night, Jack watched Rex lying in the backyard, his eyes fixed on the stars. The evening air was cool against Jack's skin as he settled onto the wooden steps of the porch. The stars were vibrant here, away from the city lights, a canopy of silver against the void. In Afghanistan, he and Rex had often slept under stars like these, the dog's body warm against his side, a comfort in the alien landscape. "I'm not giving up on you," Jack said aloud, as if speaking to the wind. "You didn't give up on me when I needed you most, and I'm not giving up now." He knew he was asking a lot, but he also knew that the bond between them was still there, even if buried beneath layers of trauma. As the air grew colder, Jack decided to give Rex the space he needed. He went inside, leaving the back door open, and went to bed. Hours later, the sound of paws scratching the floor woke him. Looking at the foot of the bed, he saw Rex lying there, his eyes half closed. Jack didn't say anything, just smiled in the dark. The distance between them was shrinking. It was still small, but enough to reignite his determination. The next morning, Jack called the shelter and spoke with Sarah. I was wondering if you knew what commands he responds to, he asked. The military has standard protocols, but sometimes handlers develop their own. Let me check his file, Sarah said. The line went quiet for a moment. There's nothing specific here, but there is a note that he was initially trained in German before being retrained with English commands. Jack thanked her and hung up, a plan forming in his mind. In the kitchen, he found Rex watching him from the doorway. "Sits," Jack said firmly. It was one of the first commands they'd learned together. Rex's ears perked forward, and after a moment's hesitation, he sat. Jack felt his heart race. "Platz," he said next. "Down." Rex lowered himself to the ground, his eyes never leaving Jack's face. Something had broken through. Not recognition, perhaps, but a response to the familiar language of their shared past. Jack reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out a small treat. "Gut," he said softly. "Good." In the following days, small moments began to appear, like cracks in the wall of distrust that separated Jack and Rex. On Monday morning, as Jack was chopping wood in the yard, he noticed Rex watching him from a distance, head tilted. The German shepherd kept his tail down, but there was a subtle curiosity in his eyes. Jack paused for a moment, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and reached out to Rex. "Want to help, boy?" he asked in a playful tone. Rex didn't approach, but he didn't look away either. Later that same day, during a walk around the yard, Jack picked up a stick and tossed it lightly forward, not expecting much. To his surprise, Rex took a few steps toward the object, stopped, and then returned to where he had been. Jack smiled. "Ah, so you remember how to play. You're just pretending you don't." Despite Rex's shy response, that moment felt like progress. On Tuesday, Jack received an unexpected visit. Emily's car pulled into his driveway around noon, dust billowing behind her sedan. She stepped out, a bag of groceries in one arm and a concerned expression on her face. "I had to see for myself," she explained as Jack met her at the door. "How are you two doing?" Jack led her inside where Rex was resting in his corner. The dog immediately stood at the sight of a stranger, body tense. "It's okay, Rex," Jack said calmly. "This is Emily. She's family." Emily didn't approach Rex directly, instead setting the groceries on the kitchen counter and giving the dog space. "He looks just like in the photos you sent from overseas." "A little grayer around the muzzle," Jack said with a small smile. "Aren't we all?" Emily studied her brother's face. "You look better, Jack. Less haunted." Jack shrugged, uncomfortable with the observation. "Having someone else to worry about helps, I guess." They spent the afternoon together, Emily preparing a proper meal while Jack told her about the small breakthroughs with Rex. The dog remained wary of Emily but seemed calmer in Jack's presence, occasionally looking to him as if for reassurance. "He's starting to trust you again," Emily noted as she prepared to leave. "And I think it goes both ways." Jack hadn't considered it that way, but she was right. In focusing on Rex's recovery, he'd begun to engage with the world again, to make plans beyond merely surviving each day. After she left, Jack decided to take him for a walk. Rex's old ID tag was still stored away, so Jack cleaned it and attached it to the new collar. "Let's go for a walk," he said, adjusting the leash. Rex hesitated when Jack opened the gate, looking outside as if the world beyond the fence was hostile. Still, with a gentle tug, Jack managed to convince him to walk. During the walk, Rex seemed tense, always alert. He was constantly sniffing the air and kept his body stiff, as though expecting imminent danger. Jack noticed this and spoke calmly. "You don't need to be like that, boy. We're safe here." He knew those words didn't mean much to Rex, but he hoped that over time, the calm tone would start to make a difference. They followed a dirt path that led from Jack's property into the surrounding desert landscape. The terrain was different from the harsh mountains of Afghanistan, but something about the open space seemed to relax Rex. His steps became more fluid, his attention less frantic. Jack found himself talking, filling the silence with stories of their time together. "Remember that interpreter, Nassim? You never trusted him. Turned out you were right. They caught him passing information to insurgents." He chuckled. "You always were a better judge of character than me." As they were heading home, something unexpected happened. Jack was taking off Rex's leash when the dog approached and sniffed his hand. Jack stood still, feeling his heart race. "That's it, Rex," he murmured, trying not to show too much emotion. He didn't move as Rex kept exploring his scent for a few seconds before pulling away again. For Jack, that small gesture felt like a sign that something inside Rex was starting to change. That evening, while Jack was preparing dinner, Rex lay on the rug near the kitchen. It wasn't exactly an invitation for affection, but the closeness was enough for Jack to feel that they were on the right path. He looked at Rex and whispered, "I think we're becoming friends again, huh?" Rex didn't respond, but his eyes seemed less distant, as if a part of him was finally recognizing the man who had once meant everything to him. Have you ever had a moment where you felt a special connection with an animal, even after tough times? Share in the comments. We love hearing your inspiring stories. It was a gray morning, and the mist covered the yard like a veil. Jack woke up early, as he always did, but found Rex already awake, sitting by the living room window. The German Shepherd was staring out, as if lost in thought. Jack approached carefully, sensing that every interaction with the dog was a test of patience. "Remembering something, boy?" he asked softly, though he knew he wouldn't get an answer. Rex stood rigid, ears alert and eyes wary. The German Shepherd's once glossy coat now appeared dull, his muscular frame slightly diminished after months away from active duty. The scars, some visible, some not, told stories neither of them wanted to remember. Morning light filtered through the kitchen windows, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Jack's modest ranch house sat on the outskirts of town, far enough from neighbors that Rex's occasional nighttime howls wouldn't disturb anyone. The isolation suited them both, two damaged souls trying to find their way back to each other. As Jack moved to prepare breakfast, his legs stiffened, an old injury from the same explosion that had separated him from Rex years ago. He grimaced, massaging the spot just above his knee, where shrapnel had torn through muscle and bone. The doctors had done their best, but some wounds never fully heal. "Breakfast will be ready soon," Jack said, his voice deliberately calm and steady. He'd learned from the VA therapist that consistency and routine were crucial for both combat veterans and service animals suffering from PTSD. "Nothing fancy today, just eggs and bacon for me, kibble for you. Maybe tomorrow we'll try something new." Rex watched Jack's movements from the corner, maintaining the safe distance he'd established since arriving 3 weeks ago. The military handler who'd brought Rex had warned Jack not to expect too much. "He's not the same dog you knew in Afghanistan," the woman had said with a sympathetic glance. "The IED that took out your unit, It changed him, just like it changed you. After breakfast, Jack decided to bring something special for the day. From the back of the closet, he pulled out an old wooden box filled with items he'd kept since his military discharge. Among the medals, photos, and letters was a worn-out toy, a rubber ball that Rex loved during his breaks in the field. Jack's fingers brushed against a folded photograph tucked beneath his Purple Heart. He paused, unfolding the creased image carefully. 6 men and 1 dog stood together in the harsh Afghan sun, dust coating their uniforms, tired smiles on their faces. Staff Sergeant Michael Rivera, with his arm slung around Jack's shoulder. Rivera, who died instantly when the explosion hit. Private First Class Dawson, whose legs had been taken by the same blast. Captain Lewis, who'd pulled Jack to safety despite his own injuries. And there, sitting proudly at Jack's feet, was Rex, alert, powerful, alive with purpose. "We were something back then, weren't we?" Jack whispered, tracing Rex's image with his thumb. Jack held the ball for a moment, feeling the weight of the memories. Then he went to the yard where Rex was and threw the ball to the ground near the dog. Rex looked at the ball, his body immediately tensing. He sniffed the air as if the object carried a familiar scent, something buried in his memories. For a few seconds, it seemed like he was going to ignore it, but then he stepped forward. He sniffed the ball, hesitant, before stepping back again. Jack watched in silence, noticing Rex's internal struggle. "You remember this, don't you?" he asked, almost pleading. "You used to go crazy for this thing. Wouldn't let me sleep until I threw it for you, even after 18-hour patrols." The morning air was cool, carrying the scent of wildflowers from the meadow beyond Jack's property. In the distance, the mountains rose sharp against the clear blue sky, so different from the rugged terrain of Kandahar province, where they'd spent countless days searching for hidden explosives. Yet something about the isolation, the vastness of the landscape, felt familiar to them both. Jack settled into the worn Adirondack chair on the porch, giving Rex space to make his own decisions. "No pressure, buddy," he said quietly. "We've got all the time in the world." As the minutes stretched into an hour, Jack's mind drifted back to their training days. Rex had been just 18 months old when they'd first been paired, young, energetic, and laser-focused. Jack had been skeptical at first. As an explosives expert, he'd trusted his own instincts more than a dog's nose. But it had taken only one training exercise for Rex to prove his worth, finding a buried practice mine that Jack had walked right past. "Remember that instructor, Master Sergeant Williamson?" Jack chuckled softly. "Said we were the most stubborn pair he'd ever trained. Said either we'd wash out in a week or become the best team in the unit." His smile faded. "Guess we showed him, huh?" That day, something felt different. During lunch, Rex stayed closer to Jack, following his every move. For the first time, he accepted food directly from his hand. Jack could hardly believe what he was seeing, but he kept his emotions in check, moving slowly and carefully. The German Shepherd ate slowly, keeping his eyes locked on Jack as if he was beginning to trust him again. "That's it," Jack murmured encouragingly, fighting the urge to reach out and stroke the dog's head. "Small steps, just like Dr. Mehta said." Dr. Alisha Mehta, Jack's therapist at the VA, had specialized in working with military personnel and their service animals. When Jack had first mentioned his hope of reuniting with Rex, she'd been cautiously supportive. "Animals can experience trauma just like humans do," she'd explained during one of their weekly sessions. Rex may associate you with what happened that day, or he might sense your own trauma and respond to it. Either way, healing the bond between you will take time and patience. Later, Jack sat on the porch with the ball in his hand, spinning it between his fingers. "Remember when you brought me this thing in the middle of the night because you couldn't sleep?" He chuckled softly, remembering how Rex used to insist on playing even in moments of tension. "You were so stubborn. Still are, I guess." Jack tossed the ball gently across the yard, not expecting Rex to react. To his surprise, the dog perked up his ears and followed the ball with his eyes, though he didn't catch it. The afternoon stretched on, golden light filtering through the old oak trees that border Jack's property. He thought about his squad mates, where they might be now, how they were coping. Monthly calls with Lewis had become part of his routine. The former captain now ran a small construction business in Ohio, hiring primarily veterans. Dawson had gone back to school, studying biomedical engineering with hopes of improving prosthetic limbs. The others had scattered across the country, each carrying their own burdens from that day. "They'd be happy to know you're here," Jack told Rex, "especially Rivera. Remember how he always saved part of his rations for you? Said you were the only one in the unit with any sense?" That night, as Rex lay near Jack's bed, the veteran felt the distance between them continuing to shrink. It wasn't just the physical closeness. Something deeper was happening. They were still both trapped in their own pain, but now they were starting to share a piece of the burden. The nightmares came, as they often did. Jack found himself back in the dust and heat, the weight of his equipment pressing down on him as they swept the road. In the dream, Rex barked urgently, a warning, but in the chaos of the moment, with radio chatter and orders being shouted, Jack couldn't hear him clearly. Then the blinding flash, the concussive force lifting him off his feet, the world dissolving into screams and smoke. Jack awoke with a start, his t-shirt soaked with sweat, heart hammering against his ribs. He learned to control his reactions over time. No more shouting, no more thrashing that might frighten Rex. Instead, he focused on his breathing, counting slowly as Dr. Mehta had taught him. To his surprise, he felt a warm presence beside the bed. Rex stood there, watching him intently in the darkness, the dog's breathing steady and calm. "Did I wake you?" Jack asked hoarsely. "I'm sorry, boy." Rex didn't move closer, but he didn't retreat either. There was something in his posture, a vigilance and attention, that reminded Jack of their days on patrol. It was as if, even now, Rex was standing guard, protecting him from unseen threats. Before turning off the lights, Jack looked at Rex and said, "We're almost there, partner. We're almost there." The sun shone brightly that morning, spreading light across the backyard. As Jack prepared for another day with Rex, he decided to try something new, recreating one of the old training routines they used to do on the battlefield. The phone rang just as Jack was heading outside, breaking the morning stillness. It was Dr. Mehta calling to check on their progress. "How are things going with Rex?" she asked after they'd exchanged greetings. "Better," Jack replied, watching through the window as Rex explored the yard. "He took food from my hand yesterday, stayed close during the night." "That's excellent progress, Doctor," Mehta said, genuine warmth in her voice. "And how are you holding up?" Jack hesitated. "Had another nightmare. The same one." "And how did you manage it?" "The breathing exercises helped. And Rex?" He seemed to know. He was right there when I woke up. That's significant, Jack. It suggests he's reconnecting with his training, his purpose. Service dogs are attuned to their handler's distress. The fact that he responded to yours is a very positive sign. After the call ended, Jack felt a renewed sense of purpose. With a whistle hanging around his neck and a rope in hand, Jack hoped the exercise might spark something in Rex's memory, something buried beneath the trauma and time. "Let's take it slow, boy," Jack said as he walked to the center of the yard. Rex followed at a safe distance, his eyes focused on every movement. Jack whistled and gave a simple command. "Sit." For a moment, Rex stayed still, but to Jack's surprise, he slowly lowered his body and sat. "Good boy," Jack exclaimed, a mix of surprise and enthusiasm in his voice. The simple command triggered a flood of memories. Their first training session together, when Rex had stubbornly refused to follow Jack's directions, earning them both extra drills. The breakthrough weeks later, when they had finally started working as a team. The countless missions where Rex's discipline had kept them both alive. Jack thought about Specialist Tanya Rodriguez, their unit's medic and resident dog enthusiast. "Dogs live in the present," she told him once as they watched Rex work. "That's their gift to us. They don't worry about tomorrow or regret yesterday. They're just here." Rodriguez had died in the explosion too, her medical kit still strapped to her side as she tried to reach the wounded. Jack then picked up the rubber ball and threw it a little farther. "Fetch Rex!" he called, trying to recreate the energy of the past. Rex hesitated, eyeing the ball as if assessing his options. Jack stood still, waiting patiently. After a few seconds, Rex took a few steps toward the ball, stopped, looked at Jack, and finally picked it up with his mouth. A chill ran down Jack's spine. "You did it, boy!" As Rex walked back with the ball, something unexpected happened. He dropped the object at Jack's feet and looked up at him, staring in a way Jack hadn't seen in years. There was something there, a spark of recognition, as if the German shepherd was remembering who Jack was to him. The vet felt his eyes welling up, but he kept his composure. He didn't want to scare Rex with his emotions. That moment marked a turning point. For the rest of the day, Rex seemed closer, following Jack around the house and even allowing small gestures of affection. When Jack sat on the couch, Rex would lie on the floor next to him, something he had never done before. It wasn't just the training or the familiar objects. It was as if, little by little, Rex was letting his guard down and allowing Jack back in. That evening, Jack made a call he'd been considering for days. "Lewis, it's Jack." "Yeah, I know it's been a while." He paused, listening to his former captain's enthusiastic greeting. "Listen, I wanted to tell you, Rex is here. They finally released him to me." Another pause. "Yeah, it's been tough, for both of us. But today I think he remembered me. Really remembered." The conversation continued late into the night, two soldiers sharing stories of recovery and setbacks, of nightmares and small victories. Lewis had been the one who carried Jack to safety after the explosion, despite his own shattered collarbone and punctured lung. They rarely spoke about that day directly, but its presence lingered in every conversation, an invisible thread connecting their lives. "You know what Dawson said when I told him about Rex?" Lewis asked. "He said, that dog was the best damn soldier in our unit. And he wasn't wrong." After hanging up, Jack felt lighter than he had in months. Sharing the day's progress had made it more real somehow, more significant. That night, while Jack was organizing his belongings, he found an old photo of him and Rex in the field, taken on the day they completed a difficult mission. In the picture, both of them were exhausted, but there was a gleam of pride in their eyes. The mission had been particularly dangerous, a sweep of a small village where intelligence suggested a cache of explosives was hidden. Rex had worked tirelessly for hours, methodically checking buildings and alleyways while Jack followed, trusting the dog's instincts completely. When Rex had finally alerted on a seemingly innocuous pile of rubble, Jack had discovered enough materials to build dozens of IEDs. General Patterson himself had commended them, noting that their work had likely saved countless lives. Jack placed the photo on the table next to the bed and showed it to Rex. "Look at this, boy. We made one heck of a team, didn't we?" Rex looked at the photo for a few seconds before lying down next to Jack, closer than he had ever been since coming to that house. Jack remembered his father's skepticism when he'd first enlisted. Harold Matthews had been a Vietnam veteran, a man who'd returned from war determined to forget everything he'd seen and done there. "The military takes more than it gives," he'd warned Jack, "and when they're done with you, they move on. Remember that." But his father had been wrong about one thing. The military had given Jack Rex, a partnership unlike anything he'd ever known, a bond that went beyond words and explanation. And now, against all odds, they were finding their way back to each other. The sound of distant thunder sliced through the gray sky as rain began to fall over Jack's backyard. He looked outside, watching Rex stand near the porch, his nose pointed toward the horizon. It was as if the dog were in a trance, hypnotized by the dance of lightning and the drumming of the rain. Jack, holding a coffee mug, approached slowly. "You've always loved storms, remember?" he murmured, more to himself. Their first thunderstorm together had been during training in North Carolina. While other dogs had become agitated or frightened, Rex had stood at attention, fascinated by the display of natural power. Their handler at the time, Staff Sergeant Wilson, had been impressed. "That's rare," he told Jack. "Most dogs hate storms. You've got a special one there." Rex turned his head slowly, his eyes meeting Jack's. For the first time in weeks, there was something different in that gaze. It wasn't the complete barrier of distrust that had once separated them. It was hesitation, yes, but also a glimmer of curiosity. A small sign that something inside Rex was changing. Jack's heart quickened. He knew there was still a long way to go, but moments like this gave him the strength to keep going. Deciding to seize the moment, Jack walked over to the cabinet and grabbed the old military whistle he had kept along with other items from his service. He knew it was a risk, but maybe the familiar sound could trigger some kind of reaction from Rex. The whistle was standard issue for handlers, a high-pitched signal that could cut through battlefield noise when voice commands were impossible to hear. They'd trained with it extensively, developing a complex system of signals that allowed Jack to direct Rex even at a distance. Heading back to the porch, Jack gave 2 short blows on the whistle, the same pattern he used during missions to call Rex back to his side. The German Shepherd turned sharply, his ears standing up in alert. For a moment, Jack almost believed Rex would run to him like he used to, but instead, Rex only took a timid step toward Jack before stopping again. The spark in his eyes faded, replaced by a shadow of doubt. He lowered his head as if fighting something inside himself. Jack sighed deeply, putting away the whistle. He didn't want to force Rex to relive memories that might still be too painful. "It's okay, partner," he said in a reassuring tone. "We'll go at your pace." Later, as the rain picked up, Jack prepared a dry blanket and a bowl of fresh water for Rex. He placed the items in the corner of the room, but this time chose not to push. He sat on the floor near the dog, but without trying to get too close. Just being there, present, was his way of showing Rex that he wasn't alone. Jack thought about his sister Emma's visit the previous month, before Rex had arrived. She'd been concerned about Jack living alone, still struggling with his own recovery. "Are you sure bringing Rex here is a good idea?" she'd asked. "What if he's too far gone? What if it makes everything worse for both of you?" Jack hadn't been able to explain it to her satisfaction. How he needed Rex just as much as he hoped Rex needed him. How, despite everything, they were still a team. How he owed it to both of them to try. Gradually, Rex began to relax, lying down on the rug and casting furtive glances in Jack's direction. As night fell, Rex did something that surprised Jack. He slowly approached, his heavy breathing echoing in the silence of the room. He stopped just a few inches away from Jack, who stayed still, respecting the dog's space. Rex sniffed the air around the veteran, as if gathering the courage to do something that, to him, was monumental. Then hesitantly, he gently touched Jack's hand with his nose. The touch lasted only a moment, but it was enough to make Jack's heart race. "You're coming back to me, boy," Jack whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He didn't try to pet Rex, knowing that any sudden movement could break the fragile moment. He just stood there, letting the dog set the pace. When Rex finally pulled away, Jack felt a wave of relief and hope. It was a small victory, but to him it carried the weight of a reclamation. That night, as the storm raged outside, Jack found Rex lying at the foot of his bed. The dog wasn't completely relaxed, but he didn't seem as distant as before. For Jack, that was all he needed, the assurance that despite all the trauma and pain, the bond between them still existed, waiting to be rebuilt. In his dreams that night, Jack wasn't in Afghanistan. Instead, he was back home in Montana, a teenager again, fishing with his father at their favorite spot on the Blackfoot River. It was the kind of memory he rarely accessed, from before his father's drinking had worsened, before the arguments that had driven Jack to enlist as soon as he graduated high school. In the dream, his father smiled at him, proud of the large trout Jack had just landed. "Good job, son," he said clearly. "You've got good instincts. Trust them." Jack woke feeling rested for the first time in weeks, the dream lingering pleasantly. He looked down to find Rex still there, watching him with those intelligent eyes. "Morning, buddy," Jack said softly. "Sleep well?" The sun rose bright the next morning, casting a golden glow over the yard. Jack was on the porch, a cup of coffee in hand, watching Rex slowly walk across the wet grass. There was something different about that morning. Rex's movements were less tense, and for brief moments he seemed less like a traumatized dog and more like the partner Jack remembered. The call from Dr. Meta came earlier than usual. "I've been thinking about your progress with Rex," she said after they'd exchanged greetings. "There's a veterans support group meeting this weekend. Several members bring their service dogs. It might be good for both of you to interact with others who understand." Jack hesitated. "I don't know if Rex is ready for that. He's just starting to trust me again." "That's precisely why it might help," she explained patiently. "Seeing other dogs who've been through similar experiences, who are functioning well with their handlers, it could reinforce the positive changes you're already seeing." After the call, Jack mulled over the suggestion as he watched Rex explore the yard. The dog's curiosity seemed more pronounced today, his investigation of familiar surroundings more thorough and engaged. Determined to keep making progress, Jack picked up the old whistle once again and held it in his hands. It was a risky test, but he knew he had to try. Jack gave 2 short whistles, the same ones he had used the night before. This time Rex lifted his head almost instantly. His ears were upright, and his whole body seemed on alert. Jack stayed calm, showing no signs of hurry or excessive expectation. "Come on, boy," he murmured in an encouraging tone. To his surprise, Rex took a few steps toward him, his eyes fixed on the whistle. The veteran felt a lump in his throat as he watched the German shepherd finally approach with more confidence. Rex stopped in front of Jack, sniffing the air as if searching for something familiar. Jack, with slow movements, picked up the rubber ball he had used earlier. He held it in front of Rex for a moment, then gently tossed it to the side. For a brief second, the dog stood still, but something seemed to change in his stance. With an unexpected burst of energy, Rex ran after the ball and brought it back, placing it at Jack's feet. The veteran stood still, feeling his eyes fill with tears. That simple action, so small yet so meaningful, was proof that Rex was beginning to overcome his barriers. "That's it, partner. I knew you were still in there," Jack said, his voice choked. He picked up the ball again and repeated the gesture, and this time Rex ran faster, his tail wagging slightly as he returned. Jack remembered Rodriguez's words from years ago. Dogs live in the present. Perhaps that was Rex's gift to him now, showing him how to be present in this moment, not trapped in the past or anxious about the future, just here, now, with a ball and an old friend. The progress felt almost magical, as if weeks of patience had finally paid off. For Jack, every step Rex took was a victory against the traumas they both carried. That evening, Jack made another important decision. He called Emma, his voice steady as he shared the day's breakthrough. "I think we're going to try Dr. Meta's suggestion, the support group this weekend." "Are you sure?" Emma asked, concern evident in her voice. "It won't be too much for him." "I don't think so. Not anymore." Jack glanced at Rex, who was watching him from across the room. "He's stronger than I gave him credit for. We both are." That night, for the first time since Rex had arrived, he lay down next to Jack on the couch, his head resting near the veteran's leg. Jack didn't try to speak or move. He just stayed there, letting the silence speak for itself. It was a moment of reconnection, a trust beginning to be restored. And as he gently stroked Rex's head, Jack knew that no matter how long it took, he would never give up on the friend who had once saved his life. The morning began with the sound of birds in the yard, but inside the house, something even more significant was happening. Rex was in the center of the room, his gaze fixed on Jack, who held a leash in one hand and a military vest in the other. The vest had been part of Rex's equipment overseas, a specialized harness that identified him as a working military dog and provided protection in dangerous environments. Jack had kept it carefully stored away, unsure if Rex would ever be ready to wear it again. "Today is the big day, buddy," Jack said with a hopeful smile. He had decided to take Rex to a special place, a nearby park that used to be their favorite spot during their days off from training. It was a final test, a chance to see how far they had come. With gentle movements, Jack approached Rex with the vest. The dog watched cautiously, but allowed Jack to slip it over his head and secure the straps. Once fully equipped, Rex stood taller, his posture changing subtly, a shadow of the proud military dog emerging once more. "Look at you," Jack said softly, every inch the soldier. On the way to the park, Rex seemed more relaxed than ever. He was sitting in the back seat of the truck, his head slightly leaning out the open window, letting the wind brush against his face. Jack watched through the rear-view mirror, feeling a mix of pride and relief. For weeks, he had fought to bring back the dog who meant so much to him, and now this moment seemed like a milestone. As they drove, Jack's mind wandered to what Dr. Meta had told him during their last session. Recovery isn't linear, she'd explained. There will be good days and bad days for both of you, but what matters is the overall trajectory. Just like the old times, huh? Jack asked, not expecting an answer. The park was relatively empty that morning. Just an elderly couple walking along the lake's edge, and a woman jogging with her border collie. Jack felt a momentary anxiety as they approached. This would be Rex's first real interaction with other dogs since his return. When they arrived at the park, Jack let go of Rex's leash and grabbed the rubber ball again. The German Shepherd stood still for a moment, analyzing the surroundings. But instead of hesitating like before, he ran toward the ball as soon as Jack threw it. The jogger slowed as she passed them, her border collie pulling slightly at the leash. "Beautiful German Shepherd," she called out. "Military dog?" Jack nodded, watching carefully for Rex's reaction to the other animal. To his surprise, Rex merely glanced at the border collie before focusing again on the ball Jack held. "He served in Afghanistan," Jack explained, a note of pride in his voice. "Just got back a few weeks ago." The woman's expression softened with understanding. "My brother was in Helmand Province with the Marines. Came back different." She hesitated, then added, "It gets better." Slowly, but it does. As she jogged away, Jack felt a strange sense of connection, not just to her, but to the invisible community of those whose lives had been touched by war. Soldiers, families, and yes, even dogs like Rex. The two of them spent hours playing, as if time and trauma had never existed. Jack increasingly felt that Rex was becoming the dog he once knew, but at the same time, he understood that both of them had changed forever. They weren't the same as before, but that didn't mean they couldn't build something new. After a particularly enthusiastic game of fetch, Jack noticed Rex watching a family picnicking nearby. A young boy, perhaps 7 or 8, was tossing a frisbee with his father. There was a time when such a scene might have triggered Rex's protective instincts. Too much movement, too much unpredictability. But now he simply observed with calm interest. "You want to meet them?" Jack asked, surprised by his own suggestion. Carefully making sure Rex's leash was secure, Jack approached the family. "Excuse me," he called. "My dog Rex is a retired military K9. He's been through a lot, but he's good with kids. Would your son like to meet him?" The parents exchanged a glance before the father nodded. "Tommy loves dogs," he said. "We've been thinking about getting one." Jack knelt beside Rex, keeping one hand on his back for reassurance. "Rex, stay," he commanded gently. Then to the boy who approached cautiously, "Hold out your hand first, palm up. Let him sniff you." Tommy followed Jack's instructions perfectly, his face a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Rex stretched his neck forward, nostrils flaring as he took in the boy's scent. Then, to Jack's amazement, Rex lowered his head slightly, allowing Tommy to stroke his fur. "He's so soft," Tommy exclaimed. "What kind of dog is he?" "He's a German Shepherd," Jack explained, unable to keep the emotion from his voice. "And he's very brave. He used to find bombs to keep soldiers safe." "Wow," Tommy whispered reverently. "He's a hero." Jack swallowed hard. Yes, he is." In the late afternoon, as the sun set, Jack sat on one of the park benches, and Rex lay down next to him, resting his head on his owner's leg. Jack looked out at the horizon, a feeling of peace flooding his chest. The sky blazed with color, orange and pink streaking across the darkening blue. It reminded Jack of countless evenings in Afghanistan, watching the sun disappear behind distant mountains during rare moments of calm. Even then, in the midst of war, there had been beauty to be found. "I told you I wouldn't give up, Rex," he whispered, gently stroking the dog's head. For the first time in years, Jack felt like a part of him had been restored. Rex wasn't just a dog. He was a symbol of everything they had survived and overcome. Jack thought about the support group meetings scheduled for the weekend, imagining Rex interacting with other service dogs, himself sharing stories with veterans who would understand without explanation. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would still be nightmares, still be moments when the past threatened to overwhelm the present. But they wouldn't face those challenges alone. "What do you say we head home?" Jack asked, rising slowly from the bench. Rex stood immediately, alert and ready, looking up at Jack with clear, trusting eyes. As they headed home that night, Jack knew that the future, though uncertain, would be faced side by side with his partner. Rex, with his loyalty and courage, had found his way back to Jack's heart, and Jack, in turn, had learned that patience, love, and determination could heal even the deepest wounds. They were complete again, ready to face whatever came next together. Two warriors, one bond, forging a new path forward, not despite their scars, but because of them. If this story touched your heart, please leave a like to support, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to hear more touching stories like this. Your presence here really makes a difference.